You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
A man in Brazil dies from severe burns, maybe from a UFO. In Washington, D.C., Jack the Slasher breaks into a house and barely steals anything, but dumps molasses all over a piano and cuts up curtains and sofas. I'm Andrew Gable, and on Forgotten Darkness, I'll look through old newspapers and other sources to find those lesser-known stories of yesteryear. I look mostly at true crime and unexplained phenomena. So if either of those topics sounds like your sort of thing, check us out. You can find the podcast at forgottendarkness.podbean.com or on most podcast apps.
Hi, welcome to the Fresh Hell podcast. I'm Annie, and you just heard Andrew Gable from Forgotten Darkness. Just like us, he likes to tell you mysterious stories from olden days, and he does an amazing job. So if you enjoyed our episodes about the Dyatlov Pass incident or the Axeman of New Orleans, then you will probably love his podcast. I'm here as always with my partner in true crime, Johanna. How are you?
Hi, I'm good. I'm your virtual partner in crime, though, because if you're a new listener, you might not know that we've never actually met in person.
Yeah, that's right. We've never met. That's crazy, isn't it? We do a lot of texting, but we don't really talk on the phone either. So, these our little recording sessions weekly, I look forward to catch up with you each week.
Yep, and I have to cut out a lot of chit-chat every week. I guess that's the fun aspect of our podcast, that we're still getting to know each other at the same time that everyone listening is getting to know us. And maybe at one point we should release a bonus episode of just our crazy chit-chat.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, this is good. It's weird, but fun.
Okay, yeah. I would say let's dive into today's episode. Annie has a story for us that I don't know anything about. Annie, what are you talking about today?
Well, it's interesting that you use the phrase, let's dive in, because today I have a rather short story for you, and it's about the London beer flood of 1814. And it happened in one of my favorite areas of the city of London, just north of Covent Garden in the St. Giles neighborhood. Now, I know London is not your favorite city, but that's okay. I love it enough for both of us, as much as I can love a city. You know I'm a country mouse. Bostonians will understand what I say when I tell them that Covent Garden in London is a lot like Boston's Quincy Market Faneuil Hall area. So there's lots of shops and stalls with people and artists selling goods, street performers, that kind of thing. It's really fun. Okay, so I've been pouring through old newspaper.com articles, trying to read scanned newspapers from the early 1800s, which is so fun. And I found a whole bunch of old articles and a few good newer ones, and I'm definitely going to link to those in our sources, as we always do. But I want to especially mention a man named Martin Cornell and his website, which is zithophile.co.uk. Martin is a beer educator, consultant, author, journalist, and a beer historian. He won the British Guild of Beer Writers Annual Award 5 years running, and he also wrote the most comprehensive articles I found about this incident. And he very neatly sort of brought together every single element of the story that I had bit by bit in all of those other articles. So I'm just very grateful for him. Sadly for you, I will not be just reading his article outright, although it is tempting because he is superb. But it was my primary and favorite source, and I'm going to link to the article that I read, and we'll link to some of his books that are available on Amazon.
A zithophile is someone who loves beer, right, and educates others about beer.
Yeah, I think so. So that's right. I'm an Anglophile, so I'm one who is I love all things English and yeah, so this is a story I find very interesting, but I don't actually love beer, do you?
I wouldn't say that I love beer, but I do like it very much. I don't know if I mentioned I'm allergic to sulfite, so I can't have any wine or champagne or even cider anymore, which is okay. I always preferred beer anyway. And it's funny because when we go out for dinner and I order a beer, I swear to God, 90% of the time the waiter will serve it to my husband. Like it's impossible that a woman wants to drink beer while my husband always orders water. Yeah. Sorry for that little rant.
No,
Please
no,
go
no,
on.
no. I get it. Yeah, I never ever liked beer, but I do love a pint of cider. So I can drink all your champagne and cider. I'm a lot more of a cocktail person, but cocktails are I feel like just recently becoming a thing in the UK to a ridiculous degree. Like in the early 2000s, you'd go over there and forget about it. Like if you weren't getting a vodka tonic or a vodka cranberry or something super, super basic, like a Cosmo was right out, or a Manhattan or a sidecar. Like they just look at you like you had two heads. They had no idea what you were talking about. So,
When
all
you're
right.
gonna come here, I'm gonna make you some cocktails. You know that I worked
I know you
in a
did.
cocktail bar.
I love a I really do enjoy a nice cocktail. The funny thing is I have a really well-stocked bar at home because we don't really drink at home. Like maybe 2 or 3 times a year I'll actually fix myself a drink at home, but I don't. We just generally don't. So I have a really well-stocked bar, and but I like to get a martini when I'm out. I feel like it's like a special treat. Well, this story is about beer, and it begins at a brewery. It was called the Horseshoe Brewery, and it was located at the corner of Tottenham Court Road and Great Russell Street. Behind the brewery, where New Oxford Street is today, was the St. Giles Rookery. A rookery is a slum, but I really can't overemphasize just, how bad it was to live in a London slum in the early 1800s.
Oh, absolutely. This was way before any kind of sewer, and people would just throw waste into the streets, into the narrow streets.
Yep, exactly. And they'd flow down and contaminate the Thames. Plus, you had all of those horses everywhere and just no drainage, just nothing. So the streets were just super, super shitty.
Literally.
Yeah, literally shitty streets. And the slums, I'm not sure it's even possible to overstate how terrible it was to live in these conditions. So slumlords were rampant, and they didn't own the land usually. They leased it for about 20 years, which meant that there was really no incentive at all for them to build quality structures that would last, right? Because they'd only own it for 20 years. So they just built them really quickly, and these buildings were just shady as fuck. They were super drafty, literally freezing in winter, and would sometimes just sort of collapse. A lot of the poorest lived in the cellar or basement of these buildings, and those would kind of flood with sewage-filled water when it rained, and then that rainwater would freeze solid ice in the winter. It's just unimaginable. Countless people froze to death in what others, in even worse conditions, would consider decent shelters. Like tenements and slums all over the world, poverty was just absolutely rampant. Children, incredibly young children, were sent to work in factories and suffered abuse of every kind, and just entire families or multiple families related would live in one tiny room.
I think London at the time was the second largest city in the world, but if I remember correctly, it was on its way to push Beijing from the first place. Yes, at this time it really was the absolute worst conditions you can imagine. And I saw there exists quite a number of photos from the late 19th century that can give you like a little tiny glimpse of an idea of how bad the situation must have been. And I'm thankful that you can't smell the photos.
Oh, I can't even imagine. And this is all before the Great Stink. That's a whole
Yeah.
nother episode. There's a few that I think there are a few great stinks, one in Paris, one in London. All right, so that was a little bit of background on the area that surrounded the Horseshoe Brewery. Now let's talk a little bit about the brewery itself, which had been around for ages. And around the end of 1809, it was purchased by Henry Meux. Now, his name is spelled Meux, so I would have said Mew, but I did read a couple of accounts that specifically said that it's pronounced Meux. And so I have to think if someone in an article went out of their way to give you a phonetic pronunciation, you should probably just go with it. You know what I mean?
Meux seems to be correct if they especially mention it. But I mean, Mew is what I would have said. Did he come from France by any chance?
Maybe originally, but his family was from the Isle of Wight, but probably came over from France at some point with that last name, right?
Mm.
They were also titled. He was a baronet, so he was Sir Henry Meux. See, I just did it, Meux. I may accidentally say Mew because it just looks wrong. So he was Sir Henry Meux. It's an interesting family, actually, but I'm not going to get into all of that today. You know how I can get. I'm not doing it this time. So Henry, he had been a partner in another brewery, one of London's largest porter brewers, and he takes over the brewery, and in 1810, so pretty soon after they had bought this new brewery, Meux and Company had a 22-foot high wooden fermentation tank installed on the premises. So these enormous porter vats were seen as a must have for any, halfway decent brewery in London. In A History of Beer and Brewing, Ian S. Hornsey writes, quote, "It is thought that one of the most spectacular sights, certainly at the major London porter breweries, was the sheer size of the storage vats, much kudos being attached to the brewer in possession of the largest example." End quote.
Okay, so it's basically all the men want to show they've got the big wet, like the biggest of them all. It's like a competition. Who has the biggest wet? Okay, typical. I understand.
Right. Okay. So this massive vat was held together with over 20 equally massive iron rings. And so this giant barrel held the equivalent of over 3,500 barrels, which is more than 1 million pints of brown porter ale. So this thing is it's huge. And they fill it to about 4 inches from the top, which helped in the fermentation process. It did this in a very mathematically complicated way that I'm just not going to get into because I honestly don't understand it. And it also has nothing to do with our story, except to say there were reasons other than just my vat is bigger than your vat for why these things were just so damn big, right? So again, I recommend the Zithophile blog for all your beer educational needs. I learned more than I ever thought I would. And it's also where I learned these vats held this aged porter, right? So they're holding it until it gets to a certain level of fermentation. So once it was ready, it would be sent to pubs along with fresh porter, and then customers at that time would actually have their porter beer mixed to their preference with like half fresh and half aged, or, a quarter aged and the rest fresh, or whatever it was, and you could really customize it, which is not something that happens today. That was kind of interesting. Also, having worked as a bartender, what a goddamn nightmare, right? Can you imagine, like in a modern bar today, having to mix, right? It's like a black and tan is bad enough. I know. Anyway, people really liked the Horseshoe Brewery Porter, and by 1811, their annual production was over 100,000 barrels, making it the 6th largest brewer of porter in London. Another fun fact. Sorry, you guys. You know we do this, if you haven't figured that out by now. According to Wikipedia, quote, "The name stout used for dark beer is believed to have come about because strong porters were marketed under such names as extra porter, double porter, and stout porter. The term stout porter would later be shortened to just stout." So, for example, Guinness Extra Stout was originally called Extra Superior Porter and was only given the name Extra Stout in 1840. End quote. I don't know why I feel that's important information. I've been to the Guinness Brewery and it's one of Paul's favorite beers. So there you go. And really, fingers crossed that all this information has been presented correctly, because I'm not an expert on beer. Okay, am I avoiding the tragedy about to befall this desperately poor area of London? Probably, yes. So I guess I should stop putting it off and get to it. It was Monday, October 17th, 1814, so almost 205 years ago, at around 4:30 in the afternoon, when the bottom of the 22 massive iron hoops that was located about 3 feet or 1 meter from the bottom of the vat fell off.
Just like that? How was it even possible?
Well, this was actually a relatively common occurrence, and it happened a few times a year that one of these giant vats would lose one of their iron rings. And so George Crick, the storehouse clerk, he noted that this had happened, and he wrote down the incident in a note to Florence Young. Now, Mr. Young was one of the partners of the brewery, and he ran a business that was known as backmaking. Backmaking was essentially making any kind of container of any size for the purpose of brewing. So your barrels and your vats and your kegs and all of that. So Crick writes a note to Young so that he's aware of the issue and will send someone to repair the vat, and he continues on with his work. All is normal. He's still holding on to this note for Young about an hour later, around 5:30, when he hears a tremendous boom, and he runs the short distance back to the storehouse where the vat was held, and he's absolutely stunned by what he sees. The end wall of the room, which was at least 25 feet high, 60 feet long, and 22 inches thick at its widest point, looked like a bomb had gone off. The wall was completely gone, and parts of it, as well as a lot of the roof, were just chaos and rubble. The vat had let go, and when it did, the massive force of the flowing liquid, along with the collapsing vat and all those giant iron staves falling, crushed more vessels full of beer and knocked the stopcock out of another huge vat, which joined together in what would become a 15-foot or about 5 meters high wall of hot beer. Just this dark, stinking tsunami rushes out of the brewery and into the slums nearby. The vat let go with such force that bricks from the brewery wall that exploded were found on the roofs of nearby buildings. So this was huge. Inside the brewery, Crick and the other employees are unaware of this boozy tidal wave's existence. They're just waist deep in beer, desperately trying to rescue workers who were injured, including Crick's brother John. 3 workers were pulled from the waist-high flood, and another was found in the rubble. He was injured but alive, and none of the brewery workers would die. Meanwhile, the other workers are just trying to salvage as much of the porter as they can. They were probably grateful that the vat that let go, while it was absolutely enormous, was not in fact the biggest one there.
So they had Glück im Unglück, as we say in German. Let's see, how could I translate it? Like they had a little bit of luck in a misfortune?
Oh, I like that. Glück im Unglück?
Mm-hmm.
I like that. Yes, that's exactly it. Or as I could say, it could be worse. Yeah, so according to Martin Cornell, quote, there's a report from a visit to the Horseshoe Brewery in 1812, 2 years before the disaster, written by a 34-year-old Orkney-born novelist called Mrs. Mary Brunton. She suggests it was one of the smallest. In Muse Brewery, everything is as filthy as steam and smoke and dust and rust can make it, except the steam engine, which is as polished and as clean as the bars of a drawing room grate. The first operation of this engine is to stir the malt in vats of 28 feet in diameter, filled with boiling water. The second is, in due time, to raise the wort to the coolers in the floor above. Then this wort is conveyed by leaden pipes into the tub where it is to ferment, and afterwards into the casks where the porter is first deposited. One of these casks, which I saw, measures 70 feet in diameter and is said to have cost £10,000. The iron hoops on it weigh 80 tons, and we were told that it actually contained, when we saw it, 18,000 barrels or 40,000 pounds worth of porter. Another contained 16,000 barrels, and from thence to 4,000. There are above 70 casks in the store. From the top of the immense building, which holds this very vast apparatus, we had a complete view of London and of the adjacent country. I must own, however, that I was rejoiced to find myself once more safe in the street. I never feel myself in a very elevated situation without being seized with an universal tremor. I shook in every limb for an hour after coming down." End quote. So that quote really speaks to me. I get so weak-kneed and dizzy when I'm faced with heights. And it's also a really good account of just how massive those vats really were.
Yeah, heights is one of my 2 absolute fears. And that's the one that gets worse the more I get older, actually. Like the other one, it got a little bit better.
Yep.
But the height thing, like I also have the reverse kind of problem, like when I look up to a height and I get super dizzy and shaky. So if I have to stand on a chair or something, like my husband is never letting me do that because he knows it's bad for me. So I wouldn't have gone up there or looked up.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's absolutely terrifying. It's terrifying. And this wave, this is so bad. Okay, this is a total nightmare. So the beer that was in the vats was fermenting, so it's hot. It hits the streets, which is basically just years and years of compacted excrement, right? I mean, that's what the streets are basically made of. It crashes into 2 houses. So on New Street, which no longer exists, but you remember what I said earlier about how shoddily homes were built. So this wave crashes down New Street, and it's full of all kinds of debris and garbage, and it slams into these homes, flooding the basements and causing structural collapses. Eleanor Cooper was one of the victims. She was a 14-year-old girl who worked at a pub called the Tavistock Arms on Great Russell Street, which was located behind the brewery. She was standing at the water pump scrubbing pots, as you do when you're 14, when the wave hit the 25-foot stone wall that she was standing by, and the wall collapsed on top of her. When rescuers found her hours later, still standing in the pile of rubble, first they yelled for a doctor, and then they came to the very sad realization that she had been probably killed instantly, but was just held in a completely upright standing position by the debris surrounding her, which is, I don't know, maybe that one's the worst for me, but they're all bad.
That sounds horrible. I mean, at first when I heard like beer tsunami, it might sound like a good time for some. But it really wasn't. This is just devastating to think about.
Yeah, it's It's awful. And I know what you mean, right? Because you think, like, at first I was like, oh, the Great London Beer Flood, this sounds fun.
Yeah.
It's not fun. It's gross and it's awful and it's really sad. It's awful. In another one of the houses, an Irish woman named Anne Seville was sitting next to the body of her 2-year-old son, John, who had passed away the day before. With her, supporting her in her waking the child. We talked about that during the Victorian era, right? So they were waking the body, sitting with the body before burial, even though this is pre-Victorian era. And so she's there with her friends, female friends, and they're all waiting for their sons and husbands to come from whatever exhausting manual labor job that was part of their routine. Anne and 4 other mourners, Mary Mulvey and her 3-year-old son from her first marriage, his name was Thomas Murray, Elizabeth Smith, and Catherine Butler, were all killed while sitting with Anne helping to wake her son.
That's also sad. I really.
And yeah, it's bad. So meanwhile, upstairs on the first or ground floor, depending on where you're from. So in the US, we say first floor. You're like a house would go basement, first floor, second floor. But in England, you would say basement, ground floor, first floor.
Yeah,
So
here too.
yeah, so it's different. So they were either on the first floor or the ground floor, depending on how you look at it. Mary Banfield, she was the wife of a coal heaver, and she had just sat down for tea with her 4-year-old daughter Hannah and another child when the wave flooded their tiny New Street lodging. Hannah, unfortunately, was swept through the room through a partition and killed. Mary was swept out the window and badly injured, and another child was found in the room, quote, nearly suffocated. The death toll was 8, with several more seriously injured. It was very lucky that the vat burst when it did, because it happened when a whole bunch of the residents of the rookery were at work. If it had happened an hour or two later when men and boys were home from work, or God forbid in the middle of the night when pretty much everybody would have been home, the death count would have been much, much higher.
Yeah, but just imagine you leave for work in the morning and then you return to where your family and your home was supposed to be, and all you find is death and destruction. I hate these kind of stories.
I know, I'm sorry. It's so bad. It's so
I thought
bad.
this is going to be fun. Why are
No,
you doing that to me?
no. We don't do fun, honey. This is fresh hell.
Yeah, but it's called
Really
beer
sad.
flood.
I know. I'm sorry. It's bad. But the thing that really bums me out about it is not that I would have felt better about it if it happened to wealthy people, but like these people had nothing. Do you know, it's like these people already had the most difficult lives of any people living in the city. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's just like, ugh. So there was one eyewitness account by a survivor. And so I'm going to read you this passage. Again, I got this one on the Zithophile site. And the war that's mentioned is the War of 1812, which was between the United States and the United Kingdom. So here is the account of a survivor. Quote, "The only eyewitness accounts of the disaster from a member of the public that appears to have survived, strangely, is from an American who happened by unlucky chance to be passing down New Street on a dismal night on his way to Great Russell Street, thinking about the war, then 2 years old, between the United States and Great Britain, when the Porter vat collapsed. More than 20 years later, the anonymous American wrote in the New York magazine, The Knickerbocker, quote, all at once I found myself borne onward with great velocity by a torrent which burst upon me so suddenly as almost to deprive me of breath. A roar as of falling buildings at a distance and suffocating fumes were in my ears and nostrils. I was rescued with great difficulty by the people who immediately collected around me and from whom I learned the nature of the disaster which had befallen me. An immense vat belonging to a brew house had suddenly burst and swept everything before it. Whole dwellings were literally riddled by the flood. Numbers were killed, and from among the crowds which filled the narrow passages in every direction came the groans of sufferers. Though not just rescued, as it were, from the jaws of death, my clothes heavy with the hot malt liquor which had saturated them, I can truly say that 15 minutes had not elapsed before I had entirely forgotten the late disastrous occurrence and the emotions excited by perusing in the Admiralty Bulletin an exaggerated account of a most brilliant victory gained over the American army before Baltimore, in which it was stated that 12,000 Americans had been completely put to rout by about 4,000 British troops, including a brigade of seamen. End quote. So, quick fun fact, that report that he thought was exaggerated was totally exaggerated. America had, in fact, successfully defended the British assault on Baltimore. And this was the very battle that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the song that became our national anthem, The Star-Spangled Banner. All these things are just happening at the same time. I don't know, I just think it's kind of wild. I used to sing the national anthem a lot in high school for different sporting events. Good times. It's a fun song to sing. All right, moving on. In the end, there were a lot of really strange false reports, likely made up to sell papers, actual fake news, if you will. Some reports said that many people were drinking beer from the streets and that one person died from alcohol poisoning, which is, I mean, how vile would that liquid have been? Just an actual hot malty shitstorm, right? Which is like, it's probably the name of a shot in a bar somewhere. Ugh.
Probably New Orleans.
Now I want a flaming Dr. Pepper shot. But yeah, I just don't think that too many people were actually drinking. I mean, it's possible, but I don't think that many people were drinking from the street.
I mean, it would be pretty destructive to drink that, but I could see people actually trying to do that. Like people get the worst ideas.
Oh yeah.
Like, oh yeah, it's free beer. Yeah.
Well, and to be fair, it's not like it happening today, right? Like you would never, if you spilled your drink in a parking lot, like try to get it back into a cup or something, right? Or like drop your ice cream and then pick it up off the ground and carry on like nothing had happened. But back then, you probably would because you had no sense. They didn't know germs. Germ theory wasn't a thing yet.
Oh, that's true, yeah.
But
But
they thought you got sick from miasma. So, I mean,
the smell alone must have been so bad. I mean,
so bad.
Forget about the shitty streets. Did you ever live close to a brewery? I mean, it can be literally breathtaking, not in the good way.
Yeah, no, I've never lived near one, but I've been to a few and toured them. And yeah, it's stinky. I'm not a fan. So I think probably a lot of the reports were just sort of xenophobic stereotyping because a lot of immigrants lived in the slums and poor people, so easy targets. In actuality, I think the people of London did what the people of London always do. They really rallied and they did their best. They were as quiet as they could be in the middle of this chaos so that they could try to listen for the cries of anyone who might be trapped in the rubble, even though the beer fumes were unbearable. In total, 5 of the 8 dead were mourners at Little John Saville's wake, and that included his mother Anne. A larger coffin was purchased, and Anne was placed inside of it with her son, and the other 4 were all waked at a local pub called The Ship.
That's kind of poetic.
I mean, it is, I think.
Mm-hmm.
The caskets of 14-year-old Eleanor Cooper, 4-year-old Hannah Banfield, and 3-year-old Sarah Bates, who was found in another local cellar, were also publicly waked nearby. And the people of London showed up in droves to pay their respects and probably see where all of this had happened, and to see the bodies and to sort of, original people like us. But the plate was put out. And so the people who did come to sort of gawk at the buildings that had fallen and pay their respects, or both, they would drop a shilling or a penny into the collection to help pay for the funerals. Apparently the collection at the Ship totaled over £33, which is a little over $2,000 today, if the calculator that I looked at is correct. But there were other fundraisers held for the victims of the flood, and Mr. Young, the guy that made the vats and things, he donated quite a bit of money to that fund. But these families were estimated to have lost over £3,000 worth of personal property. And again, it was such a poor area that a lot of these people probably lost every single thing they had.
Well, surely the brewery must have been held accountable for damages and the loss of life. I mean, they did pay money, right?
Well. Only 2 days after the disaster, with that disgusting foul stench of beer still a nightmare for everyone, a jury got together and they visited the site. They viewed the bodies of the 8 women and children who lost their lives, and they listened to a whole bunch of testimony from people like Crick. And in the end, it was deemed that the deaths were caused, quote, casually, accidentally, and by misfortune, end quote. And if you're not exactly sure what that means, they essentially deemed the disaster to have been an act of God that the brewery was in no way responsible for.
Wait, are you trying to tell us that the victims got nothing? Zero.
Yep, they got nothing. The poorest of the poor got nothing. Not only that, but the brewery petitioned Parliament. Now remember, Sir Henry was titled, and they got a waiver for the taxes that the brewery had already paid on the thousands of barrels of beer that were lost. So it didn't lose any more money, and this prevented the company from going into bankruptcy. They stayed in operation for over a century. As a result of the accident, one good thing is that those huge wooden tanks were phased out across the industry and replaced with lined concrete vessels. And the original site eventually closed in 1921, and it's now where the Dominion Theater sits. That's where I saw We Will Rock You years ago. Highly recommended if you're a Queen fan. Yeah, but that's the story of the Great London Beer Flood of 1814, which honestly, it's just so sad. I mean, no matter who the victims were, it would be sad, but it just happened to the poorest of the poor and their surviving families. It just makes me want to cry to think about it. You know, it's kind of like the reverse way you feel when somebody rich wins the lottery. Do you know what I mean? It's like, why, how come
Yeah,
rich people who
it's
don't
not
need
fair.
money?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's life isn't, I mean, that's
Not
life,
that
right?
I don't say it would be fair if it would have happened to rich people. You know what I
No,
mean? But
no,
it's
no, no.
sometimes life is so unfair.
It just feels a lot like the harder time you have. Well, it is. The harder of a time you have, the harder life is for you, right? The
Mm.
the worse off you are in life, the harder everything is. So tonight, please raise a glass or light one up or say a prayer or whatever your personal jam is for Eleanor Cooper, Mary Mulvey, Thomas Murray, Hannah Banfield, Sarah Bates, Anne Seville, Elizabeth Smith, and Catherine Butler.
I'm very infuriated by this story.
I
I have to
know.
be honest.
Yeah,
The
I
ending
know.
was like it's a slap in the face.
It is. It is. They could have done something.
Something like the guy who made the vets, he at least donated something,
He
you
did.
know.
Yeah, he did quite a bit, I think. Yeah, it's just, I hate it when bad things happen to people who are already struggling so much. And I do get that it was a freak occurrence, but still, it's so sad. So, do you have something to cheer us up? Do you have something good this week?
Yes, I do. I
Good.
always do.
Hooray.
So, my something good this week is an Instagram account. And I think I never recommended an Instagram account before, or no, I don't think I did. So, this one is called Hey It's Soos, which is hey.its.sooc, and it belongs to a very lovely woman named Susie. And I love the account because she lives with her family in this adorable cabin in the woods somewhere in Arizona. And she posts these beautiful landscape photos. And they're my something good very often. You know, she just takes these beautiful photos of her home and of the surrounding area. Her husband is traveling a lot, so that's very relatable for me. And it's also interesting to see how she handles these kind of things.
Yeah.
She also has 3 kids, and they have a dog called Luna, which is pretty much my only complaint I have. Come on, we need more photos of Luna. Like, seriously. Her Insta stories are also great, like very real and often very funny. So, yeah, if you want to look at pretty photos of beautiful flowers and a pretty family and a lovely cabin and a good girl, Luna, check her out.
Nice. I will. Absolutely. Mine is that I did actually have a great time with my sister Moose, and we did go get our hair done, so I am not gray anymore. It just needs to get a little bit more gray. Do you know what I mean? It's
Hmm.
like right now I just have this one patch. I need more. So don't worry, everyone. I'm going to go full on witch when it's time.
I
Um,
picture you with great silver hair, like all
I
over.
hope. I would hope so someday.
I'm gonna go to the
um,
hairdresser on Saturday, by the way.
I can't wait to see.
Oh,
Hi, Jam. Was that Jam or Leela?
shame. That's Beagle.
That's the Beagle bark. Jam. Hi, friend. Tell him I said hi. Yeah, and I'm also really looking forward to actually one of our friends of the show, Tammy. She is getting married this coming weekend. So
Yay!
congratulations to Tammy and Randy. I can't wait to celebrate with you guys. It's going to be awesome. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And we're going to be getting together with some friends of ours who are coming in from overseas as well for that wedding. So, yeah, really looking forward to that. That's my something good this week.
Super
Yeah,
good.
yeah, it's all right. So, big shout out to everyone who sent us a message this week. We always love to hear from you. It really does brighten our day. You can drop us a line at freshhellpodcast@gmail.com, or you can contact us via Facebook or Instagram.
Yes, also, please join our fantastic Facebook group. It's called Fresh Hell, Murder, Mystery, and the Macabre. Don't confuse it with the Mummy group. It's there's a mom group that has a similar name. It's a mom podcast that has a similar name, and they have a similar Facebook group. So don't get confused.
Yeah, and that's our fault. They're older. They were around
Yes.
first.
Well, it's a little bit different, the name, so.
Yes.
Yeah, our Facebook group is a group of lovely people full of interesting posts and discussions and funny memes.
Yeah, it's fun. It's fun. I'm actually enjoying that group more and more. It's I mean, I've always enjoyed it, but I don't know. Do you know what I mean? I feel like now it's just a nice break from things. I think it's
There's
been
just
something good in the past.
There's always something going on. Like
There's always something
Yeah.
going on there. Yeah, it's nice. I like it. It's a really nice, fun group of people. We love you. Yeah, if you enjoyed our show and can find a moment to rate and review us, that would really, really help us out quite a bit. And we hope you have a good week. Please tell your dogs we said hi.
Yeah, we know that your cats don't care at all.
They don't. They don't care at all. They're just waiting for you to die so they can eat you.
Hi, Annie cat.
Oh, right. Oh, my God. Hi, Annie Cat. That's all right. Annie Cat especially. Annie Cat
She drinks from a little skull.
She drinks from
It's true. Come to the
It
Facebook
is.
group and check out the photo.
You'll love it.
I swear to God, it's true.
Also, the sex chair from last week has been a very popular topic of discussion. So if you listen to our episode on, what was that episode even about now?
Evelyn Nesbit.
Oh, Evelyn Nesbit, of course. I'm like, because I know the sex chair didn't have anything to do directly with the story. My memory, dear God. So yeah, come to the Facebook group.
I think the sex chair will make another appearance, maybe for Valentine's Day.
Yeah. Everybody wants more info on that sex chair. So
and more drawings.
Yeah, come up with your own drawings, please. Submit what you think they did on that sex chair. Oh, no. So, yeah, until next week, if you're going through hell,
keep going, but don't get too close to the sex chair without a blacklight. Tschüss.
Bye. Bye.